Hey everyone, I am going to do some reading from Kate McGahan's The Walls Between Us, a Borderland Love Story. 1. At the border, west of Nogales, Arizona, USA. The small group huddled close together at the edge of the ranch near the barn. It was one of the cusps of twilight, the quarter moon rising in the east over the border between Mexico and the US. They had traveled all the way from Hermosillo, Mexico, and had been fortunate to have hitched a ride from Guarababe to Santa Ana. Their friend Eduardo joined them in Nogales. Traveling over the better part of 5 days in 100+ degrees, they were weak with hunger and thirst, but they had finally made it into the United States. "No worries, I'll go." The elder Francisco was physically fit and as agile as any man half his age. "I'm coming with you," said Victor. "Victor, no." Francisco put his hand back against his grandson in forestalling restraint. Victor disregarded the warning. Squeezing his wife's hand, he said to her, "Don't worry, Vivi. I feel I must accompany my grandfather. I'll be right back." The two men quietly took leave of the group as they waded through the high, wispy desert grass. An empty plastic gallon jug hung from the grandfather's curled and weary fingers. As he arrived at the barn faucet and began to fill it, a motion floodlight lit up the space. Moments later, a screen door flew open, and a rancher and his large shadow emerged. A shot rang out. A bullet struck a spark off the faucet, and Victor fell backwards. "Damn you Mexicans! Get out of here, all you sons of bitches!" Another gunshot rang out, and then another. As the shots echoed off the mountains all around them, Viviana let out a stifled, guttural scream. Fernando grabbed her, pulled her to him, and covered her mouth with his hand. "Shh, shh." The rancher shined a heavy-duty flashlight out across the expanse between the house and the barn, while the others remained anxiously quiet in the grass, stiff with shock and trembling with fear. Fear for their friends, fear for themselves. Was Francisco still alive? Was Victor? Chances seemed slim, and every moment counted. They feared for their own lives as well, filled with brimming emotion, but unable to release it through the speaking of it. There was nothing that could be said, not a breath that could be uttered. To their relief, the rancher went back inside, leaving nothing but the sound of the water faucet dripping in the darkness. When the coast seemed clear, Fernando, the youngest in the group, swiftly ran over to see if there was a chance the men were still alive. They were not. He gently took the silver chain off of Francisco's neck and pulled the wallet from his pants pocket. He would be sure to deliver them to the family when he returned home. Someone would have to call them to let them know. But there was no time to think about these things now. Checking Victor's pockets, he found some bills and a rosary. Fernando slipped off the cross and the gold chain that hung around his neck. These things were all that would be left for Viviana of her new husband. The two had been married just shy of a year, had been planning a family, seeking a better life by making this dangerous expedition to the US together. Victor had planned to go it alone. "I'm going to the US," Victor had said to his wife. "I want to provide for you and our future family, and I cannot do that here." "I won't let you go. I can't live without you." "Oh yes, you can, and you will." "No, I won't. I'm going with you," she had said cheerfully, heroically, tilting her chin up at him. "And that's that." Her champion smile took away all his defenses and subdued his machismo, a quality that touched off an irresistible passion in his heart. There was no arguing with her. He grabbed her by the waist and swung her around. They were so full of joy, one for the other. She would ultimately become a blessing to the group with her knowledge of herbal remedies, her kindness, and her faith. She was young and strong at 29, but possessed wisdom older than her years. She was very pretty too. A border patrol vehicle suddenly approached the far upper entry to the ranch, arriving in a cloud of dust. Oh, es la migra. Fernando returned swiftly to the group. We gotta get out of here. We must pray and grieve for our friends later. No! Viviana raced over to the barn and threw herself on top of her husband. In subdued but desperate tones she clung to him. My darling, no, 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 Victor, my Victor. Eduardo raced over to her. Viviana, we must go now. I don't care, they can kill me too. I don't want to live without him. He wrenched her off of her dead husband and firmly ushered her to move ahead of him. They had no time to waste. Tumbling over the split rail fence, they squeezed back through the barbed wire, then hightailed it up the road into the canyon, beyond where there was still a trace of light in the western sky. Shh, look, El Coyote, Eduardo whispered, pointing. Sure enough, a lone coyote about 10 yards away seemed to be guiding them to their next point. Its path paralleled with theirs. A second coyote brought up their rear. We call him the trickster, said Eduardo, but we have learned we can trust him more than we can trust our fellow man. Such as it is with much of nature, commented Fernando. As the trio followed their four-legged guides, they happened upon a shallow pooled sinkhole filled with water left over from the recent rains. They were beyond thirsty, dehydrated and weak. The last sprint took almost all the energy they had left. As the men filtered the water through a clean t-shirt, the coyote sloped away on a gentle run through the nearby desert hills. It was not long before Viviana sat down in a speechless daze. The impact of the situation was starting to hit home. Fernando quietly joined her. He gently placed Victor's backpack beside her, then took her upturned hand, and into it he drizzled her husband's chain and rosary, closing her fingers gently around them. Putting a brotherly arm around her shoulders, he noticed she had traces of Victor's blood on her blouse. I'm so sorry, Viv. We knew this could happen when we started this journey. Fernando, you have been a good friend to us, as you have been to me. Our Victor, he will be missed very much. I don't know what to do. I was only coming here because he was coming here. He was my magnetic north. I don't want to be here without him. I just want to go home. The men looked at her and then looked helplessly at each other. While it would be just a few hours back to the border, Eduardo and Fernando were filled with concern, and rightfully so. It was not without her notice. You two keep going. I'm going to go back. I cannot do this. I don't want to do it without him. Let's talk about this in the morning. Things might look different then, said Eduardo. They slept through the night under a rock overhang, the men joking about it being waterfront property. The tiny pool of water was about the size of a cereal bowl. It was hard for them to find reasons to smile for the loss of their friends and for the unknown road north that lay ahead of them, which held potential dangers. Their concern for Viviana was at the forefront. They knew their friend Victor would want them to look out for her. Victor and Francisco had been in the wrong place, the wrong time, the wrong year. Every 7 years Francisco would burn his fields instead of reaping them. Ash is full of nitrogen, which makes the soil rich. It is worth losing the annual crop to allow the next 6 years to flourish, he would say. We cannot keep using and using Mother Earth and not replenish her. There will be no minerals left if we keep using her without giving something back to her. It's like a husband who takes and takes from his wife. She will not stay very long. Every 7th year he would take the growing and harvest seasons and go to the US to work the cotton fields north of Tucson. Now, together, a grandfather and his grandson, in a land where there is no death. The morning was still pleasantly cool as the men spoke in hushed tones so as not to awaken Viviana, who had been restless most of the night. How long will it be before we arrive at the farm? Probably several more days, depending on weather and the mountains. What will we do about Viv? asked Fernando. "It could jeopardize our work if we're late." "I think we should take her back and then try again." Viviana's sleepy voice interrupted them. "Nonsense. You're already many hours into this trip. You two keep going. You're going to be very glad you didn't add another day to your journey because of me. I will be okay. I will be sure to keep the morning sun on my left and the evening sun on my right." She still held the cross, its chain dangling from her fingers. Fernando took the chain from her hand and hung it around her neck for safekeeping on the journey. The men walked her as far as a clearing. They had to restrain themselves from walking her all the way back to Mexico, and it was all they could do not to go to the nearby ranch to see what had happened to the bodies of their friends. Fernando stiffened, a sudden shiver running up his spine as he remembered how he had taken Francisco's wallet and subsequently left nothing for identification of his body. He imagined the public headstone that would read, "Desconocido," unknown. No one would know what a good friend he was, and a good husband and father. No one would know how intelligent, helpful, and kind Francisco was to everyone in his path. No one. But Fernando said nothing. It was not the time. There was nothing that could be done about it now. "It's okay," said Eduardo, as if reading his friend's mind. "They will be taken to the coroner's office where everything possible will be done to identify them and return them home." Fernando and Eduardo gave Viviana a hug, and Fernando thrust the wad of bills that had been Victor's into the zippered pocket of Victor's backpack, which was slung over Viviana's shoulder. The men were torn, wanting to walk her back to the border, yet desperate to be on their way. "God be with you, Viviana. Vaya con Dios." "I'll be fine," she reassured them. She was convincing. How could things get any worse? It is important not to ask such questions, because you will get an answer. 2. Viviana, Sonoran Desert, Arizona, USA. The two men got back on track for the trek north. They needed to report for work by the week's end, or others would be placed in the jobs and they would be turned away. Viviana started out strong, traveling south on the adrenaline left over from the night before. She tried to locate the group's trail of footprints, but she couldn't. The path was a wasteland of saguaro and scrub brush. There was no shade anywhere. The nylon backpacks weighed as heavy as her heavy heart. She tried not to think too much about what her life would be like when she re-entered Mexico. She had left there happily married, and days later she was returning alone, a grieving widow. An only child whose father had abused, then deserted. Her mother had died a few years back. There were only a couple of cousins she had never met living somewhere near Mexico City. It would not be long, she reassured herself. Surrounded by a death-like silence, she passed an old broken wagon wheel and a couple of sun-bleached cattle skulls, silent witnesses to the secrets of the ages. She wondered why she had not noticed these things on the journey north, but she did not yet realize that she had altered her course further west from the path they had taken from Nogales. The slight change would come to impact her entire destiny. She was getting fatigued. One foot in front of the other, her feet felt like lead. The two backpacks became heavier and heavier. When she reached a comfortable place, she planned to integrate the two. Her focus, always on the mountains to the south, even though there were mountains all around her as far as the eye could see. "I'm in the palm of God's hand," she said aloud. "God will help me. Oh, I don't know what I'll do when I get home. I don't know where home is anymore. Victor was my home." Then the tears came, gushing. She whimpered, but her strength of faith remained intact. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Meanwhile, a coyote pair was following along, their eyes fixed upon her. She saw them, but she was not afraid. Was it the same pair they had seen the night before? She had skewed off course from the beginning of the walk, but once she reached the plain, She knew she was within a couple of hours of the border. She was eager to get there now. She stopped and gazed southward towards the Alta River. It was too late to make it through the border before dark. She had heard of suspicious characters at the border's edges set to pillage and rape, so she sought refuge for the night. There was no hurry. No one was expecting her. No one was missing her.